5, so we'll get cracking straight away with the briefing. So the first agenda item is Swan Reach Swims, and welcome Caroline, who's going to present to us and have a discussion on this exciting opportunity. But we've got the opportunity to explore some funding through the LGA.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. I am Caroline, your Environmental Health Officer. So I'm just going to provide a bit of an overview of a report that I'll be presenting to the next council meeting about this exciting project we've been working on for a bit. We have secured some funding for a concept design for a community wastewater management in the Swan Reach Township, so a town sewage system. And so as part of the funding of that project, we need to undertake public consultation. I really just want to stress that this report is purely about two things with my report. One is about endorsing the community engagement plan, and secondly, about whether we need to undertake a prudential review. It's important to note that we are not making a decision about actually putting a swim system in the ground at this stage. That will be the next report. So I've done a bit of a presentation up, so just bear with me. I'm going to, hopefully this works. Okay. Can you see my presentation? Yep. Okay. All right. Okay. So just a bit of a rundown on where we've received the money from. So obviously the state government provides annual funding to the local government association for these regional swims projects, which otherwise wouldn't be captured as part of the SA Water program. So there's a committee established through the LGA that manages the money and the projects, and that committee has members from various state government organisations and local government as well to manage the money. And basically councils apply for funding for townships they consider at high risk and needing a community wastewater management system. The state committee determines the applications and prioritise high risk towns. But the most important factor with any of these projects is whether they have elected members' support. These projects just don't get up if we don't have the backing of our elected members. So I just want to really hit home why swims are so important in our townships. They remove the environmental impact of a town's wastewater into the groundwater. It also allows for increased development on the allotments. Now, on the slide here, I've included two photos. The photo which has the yellow shaded area shows a conventional septic tank and soakage system on a block. Now, the area that soakage system takes up is significant. Nothing can be built over that soakage area. You can't drive on it. Basically, it's useless land and you can just put a garden or some lawn on it. But if you put in a swim system, so you'll see the area with the green on it. Basically, it takes away all of that old soakage area and that land becomes usable again. So people have the chance to develop their blocks a bit more, like, you know, put a shed up or put a pool in. It just provides a lot more open space on their allotment, which is what we want in townships. It also reduces the overall cost of wastewater replacements to residents. So you might be looking at between $10,000 to $20,000, maybe $30,000 to replace your wastewater system. So it can be quite a significant cost for residents. And unfortunately, if they don't do that, then council, so myself, needs to step in and put a notice on the property. And if they fail to do that, council then needs to step in and do the work for them, which obviously the last one we did was about $26,000. So council needs to pay for it and put that default on the property. So we only get that money back if the property sells. Obviously, it also provides significant environmental benefits for water reuse. So in this instance, Swan Reach, we've got the golf course screaming at us to take the water. We've already had a meeting with the golf club and they were there with their shovels. They are really keen to take that water already, which is great. Either positively or negatively, it does increase the property values we've found. And probably a big one is for Swan Reach's case, it does reduce the impact on the River Murray. We do have that SA water intake pipe there. I'm also mindful that there are some negative with installing a swims. such as the ongoing annual maintenance costs, and also connecting that dwelling to the connection point, which might mean the residents has to dig up, you know, their garden or their footpath. However, these negatives are insignificant compared to the positives of putting in a swim system for the town. So what we've done so far is in 2017, council applied for 4 towns to be considered as part of the LGA prioritisation listing. And in 2022, things take a bit of time, obviously. Feasibility studies were undertaken in Tunkillo, Swanreach, Blanchetown and Morgan. So the feasibility studies are fully funded by the Local Government Association, and they look at what's happening in the town at that time. So they want to see what sort of systems people have got, are there issues, size of the allotments, and whether there are any environmental factors such as the River Murray for that specific town. So out of our 4 towns, at that time, Swanreach was ranked the highest. That was 21st out of 32 towns on the list. As it stands today, Swanreach is still ranked 17th on the list of towns. So obviously not very high on the list. The results from the feasibility study were a little alarming. Basically, most of them are pretty non-compliant with current standards. Over half of them are nearing the end of life. But most concerning for me is the fact that half of the blocks in our township don't have an adequate area to install a new wastewater system if they fail. So that causes huge headaches for everybody, and particularly this is a township, so people are living there permanently. It's not a shack area. So this was presented to council in 2022. And we resolved to write to the LGA seeking funding to progress to a concept design, keeping in mind we were low on the list, but we were successful in getting that funding. So we went through a tendering process. WA engineers were engaged through the tendering process, and we had the final concept design completed and sent to the LGA in late January 2025. So this is the most exciting part, but also I really just want to stress that because it is a concept design, these costs are very indicative at this stage. Okay, so basically at this stage, to construct a swims in Swanreach, it'll cost about $7.5 million. The LGA will provide just under $7.2 million to install that system. So there'll be a council contribution of just over $300,000. Now, the sort of projects that we're seeing at the LGA level is normally about a $1 to $2 million at least council contribution. So this is a fantastic result for us. So as part of the funding agreement, we need to undertake public consultation to determine if we proceed to a detailed design and installation of the swims for Swanreach. And obviously, if we do decide to proceed to a higher level detailed design, the scheme's construction costs will move to a higher level of confidence, and we can be sure on how much those systems are going to cost as well. So this is just a layout of what the engineers have come up with. This concept design will show us how the system will work, where the pipes might go, where the treatment plant will go, and where the water reuse will occur. So in consultation with council swims teams, we've required that all of the properties that were inundated in the floods be unpressurised systems, and that is so we can keep that system operating for the rest of the township during a flood event again. The remaining properties that are out of the flood zone will be on old-fashioned gravity sewer. So that means no septic tank, nothing. It's just a straight pipe from their house into the main line. So all of this liquid will gravitate to a common pump chamber, and then it will pump up a pressurised line all the way up Nildotty Road. And you'll see there's a circle at the top of the map near number 4. So the engineers have identified that this area where that square is where a wastewater treatment plant can go with a storage lagoon. And then we simply pump across the road to the golf course, which is number 4 on that map. So it's a really simple system. Yeah, and fantastic opportunity for reuse for the community as well. So obviously a critical component of the public consultation will be the cost for residents. They're going to want to know how much it's going to hit them in the pocket. So it's really important to note that with this LGA program that the charges are equivalent to SA water charges so that there's no disadvantage to regional communities. So the fees you see here are based on the current financial year service charge for SA water. So at this stage, the cost for residents will be a capital charge, which is just under $7,500. There will be an ongoing annual service fee, which all the other swims in our area pay. And so that's approximately about $360 a year at this stage. And then obviously they need to hook their house up to the connection point as well. Now, as we have done in the past, we obviously provide payment options to residents. And so that capital charge can either be paid up in full or spread across the rates over 10 years. And Clive's kindly worked out the interest rate and the annual repayments as well, just so you get a bit of an idea of what they'd be up for. But again, these are very indicative prices at this early stage. So one of the resolutions in my report will be to endorse my public consultation engagement plan. So the plan is that we will undertake community engagement in April, and that will consist of a letter, information sheet and survey to all affected residents. We will hold a public meeting. Now, the LGA have kindly offered to fund a facilitator for that public meeting as well, which makes those meetings go a lot smoother. And just to be sure that everybody's had ample opportunity to talk to us about it, or if they've got concerns, I want to run some one-on-one drop-in sessions at the Robert Taylor House as well, just so that everyone can make sure they understand the process. So following conclusion of this public consultation period, we're going to collate all the information and then obviously present a report to council. Now we anticipate the May meeting, perhaps might push it out to June. But one critical thing with these projects is that we are up against other projects. And so there is a chance that the LGA could run out of funding money. So timing's really important for us. And it's really important that we just keep the ball rolling with these projects if we want to keep pushing. One other thing that's come up is, do we require a prudential review with such a large project? Now, this is in accordance with our prudential management policy, which outlines our requirements. So senior management team consider it's probably important that we do the prudential review, but it's just whether we do this report concurrently with the public consultation period, or if we hold it after a positive outcome from the public consultation period. So Clive, I might just throw it over to you to throw in anything that I've missed about that.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Just to add that there's basically two triggers that can require a review, prudential review. One of those is based on like the capital amount of the project. And the other one is that if council just seems that it's a high risk area, that they may want to have a prudential review performed. And then I suppose when you have a prudential review, that can be done either possibly in-house, or if it's something specialised, then it may be a requirement to have that done by someone specialised in that area. And also the complexity of the prudential report, could be from as simple as a one-pager if it was done internally to, it could be quite detailed if it's done externally. And there's the situation or the project you're looking at is very complex. So that's all I've got to say, basically.
All right. Thanks, Clive. Yep, Mayor Bailey.
Sounds great that we can get the majority funded. The $315,000 that it will cost council, is that recoverable with the 7,405 each head? So it will be fully refundable, so it doesn't cost any other ratepayer that are already paying for their own swims and SA water, whatever. That's correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Perfect. What else did I have? Oh, obviously this has been quite a big thing in Murray Bridge at the moment, and I think hasn't been supported by elected members, but a lot bigger crowd. How many properties are we talking about here?
So this will cover 176 connections.
Yeah. And I can't remember on that first or second slide that you had the percentage of already dodgy type properties. So if we didn't do this, would they all be getting those notices that you talked about? And then we have an issue that they don't even have a big enough block of land for us to build a system and then recharge. So yeah, if you've got the facts that it's cost $26,000, I mean $7,000 and payable over 10 years sounds like quite a good deal for those people. And you would think if you weren't getting that $7 million from the LGA, obviously would be a lot more expensive. So it almost sounds like a no-brainer. So it does sound good to at least take that to the public to listen to. And the prudential review, I don't know. Of course, I would like that just because I'm that sort of person. But if we're getting $7 million of income when the actual only capital cost to council is 315, so I think so just something in-house would be great, nice and cheap.
That's good to know. And I think it's important to note as well, you raise a good point that with that capital charge being recouped, basically we'll have an extra $1 million sitting in the account already before the scheme's operating, because our contribution is so small compared to the funding. So it is a significant win for us. So I guess the question really is whether, you know, the in-house prudential review can be done whilst we do the public consultation period, or do we hold it after we have a positive outcome from that public consultation period? That's really the question that we need answered. So
yeah, I guess if it's in-house, the capability of staff and the capacity of staff, and you know, I'd be happy to get the ball rolling ASAP, knowing that the concerns that we would have if we don't get this funding, and how much it could cost the people of Swan Reach.
But look, we just have to manage the risks associated as well. And as you said, Mayor Bailey, the resources. So that's something the elected members can consider, and we can make a decision at the council meeting on whether they feel that's appropriate or not. Because obviously there's complexities with the Swiss system as well. Caroline, can I ask a question? Do we need everyone, like, what is it about the consensus? So we do this consultation and we've got the figures and everyone says yes, and some people say no. How do we manage, you know, that, given, you know, we need the contribution for all of those 176 properties, I think it was, if they're not?
So I think in the past we've focused on majority rules. However, I think if generally the consensus is, you know, pretty favourable, but the finance is an issue, I think that's something that needs to be factored in as well. So there might be a couple of ways to go with this one, but it'd be good to have majority rules. But I think we need to consider how much funding we've got and the fantastic opportunity that if finance is the only issue for these people, then I think we need to probably look favourably upon that as well.
And what happens to the Marks landing systems, the ones that are already existing in Swan Reach?
So as part of the concept design, the LGA kindly funded us to get a bit of a price to hook Marks Landing in to Swan Reach. So that will cost an extra $1 million. Now that won't be covered under funding, but that should be already sort of covered in our existing financial accounts for Marks Landing. But this system, if we do go to detailed design, the LGA have already said that they are happy to look at combining both the existing Swan Reach shack treatment plant and Marks Landing into the one. So we'll only have one for the whole of Swan Reach, which is good. So I guess they just didn't want to waste too much money while we're in the concept design phase on looking at that sort of stuff yet. But they're happy to do it in detailed design if that's how we proceed.
Thanks. Do you have more slides, Caroline?
I think I've got just what we've done so far, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, keep going. That's fine.
All right. Yep. Okay. All right. So just what we've done so far. So we've put our application to the LGA. We've had a feasibility study done. We're on the concept design offer. Now we are almost at this next point, we're subject to community and elected member support. We have a resolution to proceed to detailed design. Now, it's important for people to remember, and just factor this in when we come to the next council report, is that if council does decide to proceed to detailed design, we will also be committing to the construction of the swims. Now, if at some point something happens, there's a big community outroar, we do the detailed design and the ratepayers say, no, don't want it, council will need to repay that money that the LGA have invested into a detailed design, and that's approximately $400,000. So it's something just to keep in the back of your mind for now when we go to this public consultation meeting, is that we can go to detailed design, but we are committing to construction when we do that as well. And obviously this is all dependent on whether the LGA do have enough money to fund these projects, because there are about 4 or 5 different projects going on as well in the background. So that's why I just reiterate that the timing for this project is really critical if we want to get on the front foot. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Caroline. I'll open up to questions and I'll just make one comment. Obviously, that's where it's really important to get those financials as accurate as possible, knowing that they're only indicative, because we've had some challenges with Cornamont previously. Not Cornamont, sorry. What was it across the river?
Kawira.
Kawira, I knew it started with C, where the actual costs in the end were higher than the original costs. And so then that caused some issues with the residents, because we need to be really clear that when we go through this process, what we're doing is indicative as best we know, but there may be some variations to that. And they're not going to be double or anything like that, but until you've actually got the detailed design, you don't know exactly what the figures are going to look like. So we need to manage that risk as well. Councillor Schultz.
Yeah, I think given the last part of what Caroline said, I think the public consultation is the key part here. If the public consultation falls flat and council was already committed to going ahead with it, even with LGA funding, and we could be liable for X amount of dollars afterwards, I think just leave it to the public consultation, leave the prudential bit until after the consultation, that result, and then work it from there.
Any other questions or comments? Well, yep, Jeff, Councillor Barber.
Yeah, with the public consultation, I think it would be very important to get the Swan Reach Progress involved, because they are quite influential in the town of Swan Reach, from what I understand. So if we want to get a lot of people to participate in that consultation process, I think it's important to get them involved in that.
Thanks, Councillor Barber. Mandy.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, just a question about if we've done something similar to this before, do we have any experience of the reaction of the community to putting in a new system that they then obviously need to pay for?
It'll be about the price point, Mandy, I think, and please add in any comments for Clive and Caroline and the others that have been through this system. I think there's generally a positivity about having a swim system rather than a septic system, but it's about the affordability and the cost. That's what it will come down. That's just my opinion, Caroline, or anyone else.
Yeah, that's correct. Generally, people are favourable, but it's just that price point. That's the deal breaker for a lot of people.
So maybe, Carolyn, if you could just give like an estimation of if someone's septic system failed, how much they would be up for.
You're on mute, Caroline.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I will factor that into the presentation already, but you're looking at $20,000, $30,000 for replacement. So yeah.
Kirsty.
There we go. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm just wondering the other 3 towns that were on the list of needing this. How far down the list are they compared to Swan Reach? Because there could be that sort of pushback, you know, we're in need of it. So where do they rank as such?
So off the top of my head, I know Tonkilo's last on the list. And then I think behind Swan Reach is Blanchetown and then Morgan, but they are significantly lower. So we were very fortunate to get Swan Reach up where we have. Yep.
And the LGA does that ranking, Caroline. And so, you know, it is, I think the key takeaway is we were down the list with Swan Reach, but there's a need and an opportunity there. And so we've been fortunate that we've jumped the list there as we speak. Probably the other comment, before I ask if there's any more and we move on to the next topic, is, you know, from a growth perspective, Gary, you know, this is an opportunity because you can have smaller blocks and the potential for being more attractive to a township. And we've identified Swan Reach as one of our growth areas.
Yeah, that's correct, Ben. So, I mean, and Caroline and I, you know, we were pushing to have the LGA at least allow us to sort of give consideration to, you know, future growth. But yeah, that was something that would have to now, you know, definitely factor into the growth strategy as to what opportunities it opens up.
Thanks, Gary. Mayor Bailey.
Yeah, I just did a quick calculation. So if we had to pay the $7 million, so if no funding's available from the LGA, it's about $40,000 per property. So $7,000 is a fairly good deal. So it might be worth, you know, letting people know that this funding won't be there forever.
Correct. Yeah, and it's all about managing risk and you know, seizing the opportunities when they come, but doing it prudentially. And I don't mean necessarily a prudential report. I just do being prudent in our decision making. So, is there any other questions from the group?
Just one more for me. Sorry, when you add the 7,000, it only takes 42 to get to the 300-odd thousand. So then letting the community know that the rest will sit in your account to pay for maintenance or whatever it is too.
Thank you, Caroline. Do you have anything else?
No, that's it. Just, I guess, if you got any other queries, just send them through to Gary. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Really informative and also an exciting opportunity for us to consider. Thank you. Enjoy. You can stay, but I'm sure you've probably got better things to do. See you later. Okay, next item is the Palmer Wind Farm update. So Gary's going to give us a quick update on that.
Yep, thanks, Ben. Yeah, so members, on the 26th of Feb last week, I attended the SCAP meeting, the State Commission Assessment Panel meeting, where the Palmer Wind Farm DA variation was being considered. So there was a hearing of representations for those that had put representations during the public notification period. In addition to, there was opportunity to hear from referral bodies that were also provide submissions during the referral period. So as council, we had put in a submission during the referral period. That submission was tabled with council after it had been submitted, just due to timing. Effectively around the infrastructure agreement that we have been having ongoing conversations with Tilt Renewables to ensure that our infrastructure road assets were being factored into the construction phase and the operational phase of the wind farm should it be approved. Our second submission was made during the public notification period simply because we didn't consider it at the time of doing the referral submission. It was in response to the Dark Sky Reserve and the need to protect that in terms of the requirements by CASA generally to provide lighting beacons on the turbines. The hearing pretty much went for the entire day. In the morning was hearing all the community representations. As you can imagine, the majority of the representatives were speaking against the variation. It's fair to say that those that were in attendance were those who opposed the additional DA. and went through the whole process through the council assessment panel and the court appeal. A lot of them obviously felt that the variation should not have been considered a variation, that there should have been a new application for the reduced footprint and larger turbines. There was also statements around the preference for a more isolated, less populated location for wind farms, effectively sort of suggesting that, you know, the mid-north, further north is more appropriate in the areas around townships like Tunkillo and Palmer. A lot of commentary around the process, arguing that there was deficiencies in the public consultation process in terms of the extent of representations, the fact that there were probably new residents since the original application was notified and made. As I said, there was also other comments around CASA requirements in general aviation, again arguing that there were deficiencies in the process regarding aviation considerations, given that CASA only deal with certain scale of aviation and facilities. There was a lot of commentary around, you know, impacts obviously on adjoining properties, not only residential, but the monastery that exists. An interesting one that's emerging, this one was new to me in terms of wind farms, but it was the notion of impact on agricultural land. As you're probably aware, you know, wind farms generally don't impact significantly on farming practices. You're still able to maintain livestock, you're still able to crop and the like. But there's been a strong push more recently, apparently, in terms of accreditation, Meat and Livestock Association, in terms of livestock that is grazed in and around wind farms, due to the perceived impact of land contamination from the turbines. The obvious noise impacts was raised, and the biodiversity impacts were raised. So that was sort of the broad range of representatives' concerns. The agencies that were attended, there was a representative from Heritage Council, representative from the EPA around noise, Native Vegetation Council in terms of vegetation clearance, and there was a high degree of concern that the variation had a greater impact on vegetation clearance than the original approved proposal. So that sort of concluded around about 3:30 in the afternoon. We were then obviously asked to leave while the panel members deliberated on the representations and the variation and the response from the Tilt Renewable. And you may or may not have heard since that the variation has been approved by the panel. Thank you, Ben. That's the quick summary.
Thank you, Gary. Very thorough. Do we have any comments or questions? No, I think I can see everyone on the screen, so no comments. If you do have anything that comes up, then just reach out to Gary. And maybe next steps, Gary, I suppose.
Yeah, so while they've got the planning consent, they obviously still don't have full development approval. So in terms of the planning consent, it has quite a number of conditions and advisory notes. So in terms of our need to resolve the infrastructure agreement, that is a reserved matter. So effectively, they cannot obtain full development approval until the infrastructure agreement is resolved to our satisfaction and ultimately to the Commission's panel's satisfaction. In terms of dark sky, that's been added as an advisory note in terms of light protection, light mitigation measures. So Tilt will have to now work through all those matters and work towards full approval. And it was interesting to note too that they will have to undergo some transitional arrangements with the new Hydrogen and Renewable Energy Act.
Thanks, Gary. If there's no questions, we'll move on to the next topic, which is the Remuneration Tribunal submission. So you're provided a submission, a draft submission, yesterday afternoon for you to peruse as per the recommendation from the council. So if you've got any feedback, you can raise it here. Or also you can provide that in writing to Mayor Bailey and I myself whilst we finalise the submission. No comments? No, thank you very much for your feedback. So yeah, please pass it on, anything if you have any, to Mayor Bailey, and we'll finalise that. All right, look at us exceeding time limits. That was, how long was that allocated for? Just as I go to my 15 minutes, so we say 14 minutes there. So Clive, that means your extra topic is able to be within the timeframes.
So I've got an hour? No.
Got 9 minutes if we're on time, but you very important topic, so you work through your presentation as required.
Okay. Hopefully, just bring this up. Yeah, just as normal each year, I give a presentation and of several workshops, and this is obviously the first workshop of this year. So I'll go through some basics, and then I've got some more meaty figures, I suppose, near the end of the presentation. So basically, our budgeting for the long-term financial plan and for the forthcoming budget is mainly sourced from our asset management plans and also community plan. And then during the year, we have 3 quarterly reviews from our original budget, which are basically September, December, and March. Let me just get something out of the way. So really, there's talk about consumer price index and how that obviously affects normal households. And I'll just briefly talk about CPI, which is really historically a change of the cost of typical basket of household goods and services. And that's based on these following 11 categories. The 4 only relate to local government, or that's where we have a crossover. Really, with local government price index, the same type of concept, but we've got a different basket of goods and services. And this is prepared by the SA Centre for Economic Studies or the University of Adelaide. And it's more, it's been especially represented and produced for South Australian local government. So if we have a look at the local government price index, there's 2 sections of it. There's an operating part, which is up on the screen, and then there's also a capital. And what I've done is I've just highlighted the ones in green where I can see that there's a lapse over from the local government price index and CPI. So just as we had before, so it doesn't quite match. And I suppose the next slide will kind of give a bit of a indication of if we do an average over the last 23 years, what happens is if we compare the local government price index to the CPI, the local government price index is about 0.3% higher on average over the last 23 years. So probably the characteristics of CPI versus LGPI, the local government price index, is that CPI is normally like the lead. It either increases or decreases, and then the local government price index is probably has a staggered effect. So, and that's mainly because a lot of our goods and services are fixed through a 3 to 5 year contract. Mind you, some of those contracts may give the opportunity to justify increases on an annual basis. And when that does happen, a lot of times they base their increases on CPI. So it's kind of like a stagger where you have the actual CPI coming through, and then some of these contracts that we have set in contract, they're following with CPI, but basically like 12 months later. So the latest, as far as the Reserve Bank February 2025 monetary policy, they say that the underlying inflation has continued to moderate a little bit more than expected, and that what happens is financial conditions are restrictive, which weighs on demands and helping bring down underlying inflation. So underlying inflation has moderated over the past 3 quarters. And I suppose what you're talking about with underlying inflation is it's when you like trimmed inflation, where you take out the volatile items which may go up and down, or items which may be falsely altering our CPI. So an example, one of those would be the rebate that the federal government has given to electricity households. Unfortunately, they haven't given the same to local government. So also the Reserve Bank says cash rate targets unchanged to support the inflation return to target. That was in February 2025, and obviously since then we've had a reduction of 0.25%. So basically high inflation hurts all Australians, and it dampens the market of the demand. Although we've seen the labour market has remained strong, and unemployment has declined a little bit in late 2024 to 4.4%, and I think it's going to increase just slightly in the forward estimates. I've got those in a slide that we'll have a look in a minute. And outside the labour market, there is some evidence that capacity pressures have eased. So probably people were waiting for a year until their new car was delivered. Little things like that have indicated that supply is catching up with demand now, or more like demand has actually decreased. So the Reserve Bank said the outlook still remains uncertain. And obviously the tariffs which have been announced by the United States and other economic countries will kind of challenge the global outlook. Economic growth is forecast to pick up, and the labour market is forecast to remain tight. Even if the cash rate follows the market path, underlying inflation is projected to be but a little above 2.5% for most of the forecast period. So there's a lot of facts and figures which come out from the Reserve Bank and their monetary policy. And what I've done is just grab what I think is the most important. I'm not sure. Can you see my mouse on the slide or not?
Yes.
Nope. Yep. So basically, GDP growth is just showing that looks like the growth in Australia will be increasing. And for each line where you see the italics, that's what the previous forecasts were. So probably, in line with previous forecasts, unemployment will increase a little bit. And that's my expectations would be as well, because what we've got is interest rates will stay reasonably high for a period of time. Most important one here, CPI inflation. So I've emboldened the year-end figures. So we're looking at 2.4%, then it actually jumps up to 3.2, then going back to 2.7 in June 2027. You might say, well, if everyone's talking about, well, inflation's decreasing, why have we got this bump here of 3.2%? It's basically not only the the rebates coming off of electricity on a statewide, on the federal basis, Also, you've got Queensland, which has given substantial rebates on a state level. The trim mean inflation is probably, this is where we talk about the underlying inflation, and basically it's as in the previous slide, saying it's going to sit around about a little bit about 2.5%. So basically, if you kind of take out all those items which are a bit, a bit erratic, I suppose, or have been distorted, your trim mean inflation is going to be about 2.7 going through the next 3 years. With our long-term financial budgeting assumptions, obviously we look at the RBA forecast outlook, which I've had the table there previously. And we look at the CPI actual figures, which will come out for December. Obviously, they have an impact on what our current budget is. Then we normally look at the federal budget forecast. So they were talking about a mini budget in March. But I'm sure, I'm a little bit unsure what's going to happen. They'll have to have some type of budget before the election, but we're unsure what's going to happen. The last I heard, the federal elections will possibly be in April. General rate increase. So what I've done is I've gone with the assumptions of retaining the target of becoming financial sustainability or an operating surplus in 2026-27. For this to occur, the average rate increase for existing assessments would be 5.72% for the next 2 financial years. In saying that, my next note mentions that in 2024-25, the result is expected to be better than budgeted, than our original budget, and therefore a reduction is expected to be able to be applied. And once again, that's depending on how our March 2025 budget review comes out. So even though I've got that percentage of 5.72% there's a high chance that can be reduced by a certain amount. And as normal, operating expenses, may vary over time, but we don't want, we're not forecasting that we're going to, at this stage, bring any extra services in comparison to what we're running at the moment. So with our government grants, we're just assuming that the major grant that we get, which is our financial assistant grant, will increase by CPI, and we won't have any LRCIP grants will be received, mainly because obviously the federal government thinks the economy's a little bit running hot at the moment, and if they gave out some infrastructure program grants to local government, obviously that would push up inflation and go against what the Reserve Bank is trying to do. Employee costs, ASU increases will be based on the enterprise agreement of 3%, which has gone away from CPI. AWU increases yet to be determined, so their enterprise agreement is still under discussion. So it may or may not be in line with CPI. So loan interest rates, as per our fixed term rates, cash to bench rates expected to moderate. How quickly, it's hard to predict. Obviously, we've had 0.25% decrease already, and just for fact there, in 1990 we had 17.5% interest rates. And then in 2020, we had 0.5% interest. So how things change.
Sorry, Clive, just to go back to that slide. The ASU is 2% in this year.
It's 2%. Okay.
Yeah, not 3%. But the AW is still up for negotiation.
Oh, sorry. The 3% was the current year.
Current year, yeah.
Sorry for that. So then what I've done is just gone through and lifted the financial indicators that we had in the December budget review, just to show, see how we're trending. So basically, our operating deficit is kind of slowly pushing up to become a surplus, and obviously here in the next 2 years we're looking at becoming surplus in 2026-27. Our net financial liability, so this is a percentage of our net financial liabilities in comparison to our annual income. So our debt has basically been decreasing, and we're currently below what we forecast in the long-term financial plan. So, and the next slide will probably give an insight why is that so. Basically, what we've been doing is we haven't been keeping up with our asset renewal program. Two parts. With infrastructure, obviously, we've been distracted by the floods, and also deliberately we've deferred some of our land and our buildings renewal, just because two factors mainly. We're looking at getting rid of some of those buildings, and also financially it wouldn't have worked out possible to get into a surplus in the next 2 financial years if we pushed all that capital renewal for a building. So, we're looking at catching up over a period of time, but obviously, hopefully there'll be some savings in getting rid of some of those buildings in between. So just the old scales, basically, if we have above LGPI or CPI increases, the effect is that you can have increased services, possibly afford to be spent on new upgrading assets, and then ensure that we have a renewal assets are timely, there's a possibility to increase services, and that would increase your operating expenses, increase investments and reduction of debt. If you keep in and around LGPI or CPI, you keep to the static services level, and definitely you can't afford new upgrading assets unless you take out more loans. And if you're below LGPI, you'll have to look at reducing your services. Definitely no upgrading of assets. You'll probably end up with a backlog of renewing of assets, and looking at all continually reducing operating expenses year after year. And obviously, your debts would probably may increase if you couldn't reduce your expenses appropriately. So just the old graph of actually saying, well, everyone talks about the power of money, and if you invest money, and it works the opposite way. If you borrow too much, obviously you have to make repayments. So, and they are just the repayment figures as examples, and how much rate increase you would actually have to generate to cover those. So, it's important that we look at keeping our loans very low. And I think the last forecast was under $10 million forecast at the end of financial year, which, is great. For the first time, we've got under $10 million in a forecast. And just going through the budgeting steps and the long-term financial plan, basically, we calculate income, we set our operating expenses, our capital expenditure, which has come from our asset management plans, to determine whether we've got any discretionary expenses, or if you want to borrow of those. Obviously, council has decided not to do those. We want to try and tighten our belt until we get into a financial surplus. And obviously, if we're not satisfied with the result, we just go and loop until we actually get a model or a budget that is acceptable. So, and once again, as in one of the first slides there, we obviously try and monitor and adjust our budgets, and we've always looked at giving to council an improved budget review throughout the financial year. And I think, except for the flood, we've managed to do that. Just as a timeline, February at the moment, we're going through the salaries and wages and costings. They're being finalised at the moment. In March, we'll start drafting up the budget, the long-term financial plan. Obviously, we've got our first budget review now, and we'll prepare for the March budget review. So what we always do is we wait until our March budget review is ready, has been completed, and then that gets pushed into our future forecasting to ensure that we've got the latest figures. And in April, we'll prepare the March budget review, and that'll follow through at the start of May. We'll have an audit and risk committee, and they will look at the recommendation to council of any draft asset management plans, budget and long-term financial plan. And obviously the elected members will look at that recommendation, and that will be for public consultation of those documents. In June, we look at the public consultation. We give time for verbal submissions, and if in any possible, there may be possibly a rating workshop where we give an update of valuations and what's occurred through the different localities and also the different land uses. And then at that stage, we prepare the final asset management plan, budget and long-term financial plan. Not to put any pressure on elected members. Some councils would end public consultation and looking at adopting, but we give another month. And then in the July meeting, we'll look at the adoption of the final asset management plans, budget and long-term financial plan, and obviously raise rates and send out the notices. And that's the end of it. I'm sorry if I've gone a little bit quick. I'm more than happy. I'll send this presentation to all the elected members. Has anyone got any questions?
Thanks, Clive. Obviously, this is the first workshop, and we've got another 2 planned. This was just to set the framework, timelines, and some assumptions as we work through this process over the next 3, 4, 5 months, and consider public consultation on the long-term financial plan, annual business plan, and our budget. So, are there any questions or comments? No? Oh, Simone and Mayor Bailey?
I was just going to say thank you for all the work that the team, the whole senior management team have done to keep those expenses down and those loans down. I think we're tracking well and happy to hear what the budget looks like.
As Clive said, we're working through that process. We've done the first stages of that. We're looking at the fees and charges, wages, etc. And then, we'll get into the meaty stuff as well. Councillor Barber?
Yeah, I'd mind just a comment that with what Clive's just reviewed for us there, it's obvious that the whole organisation is taking this whole cost-saving thing quite seriously, and it looks like we're definitely heading in the right direction. So, great job, everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Barber. We've gone over your time, so unless there's any questions or comments, people probably need to get off and organise dinner and relax.
Go to another meeting.
Other meetings, yep. Mayor Bailey, you anything to close out? No, thank you very much for your attendance tonight, to the staff, for those that presented as well. Have a great night, and we'll speak soon.